right, y'all. I think we can go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the slides. So again, make sure that you change the chat to everyone instead of hosts and panelists. Use the chat for questions, comments, and then Q&A is open as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And panelists, go ahead and introduce yourselves.
I'm Drew Smith, founder and CEO of Attribution, and I am a huge attribution fan. Started a whole company based on attribution. I'm calling in from Phoenix, and ketchup on mac and cheese is just a horrible idea. No.
I'll go next. I'm Doug. I'm the axe murderer who apparently enjoys or does enjoy ketchup on his mac and cheese. I am the CMO for Caliber Mine. I had the great privilege of following Kamala, did an amazing job for Caliber Mine. There you go, Kamala. It's the only time we're going to agree the entire call today. And I have been in and around attribution way too long. This is not the first time I've been with an organization that's had a core product around attribution. So I'm pretty passionate about it and looking forward to today's conversation.
Hello, Misha here. I also am here at Caliber Mind. Spend a lot of time on the intersection of marketing and data science. Help support a lot of our customers, a lot of interesting use cases that we've come across, and very excited for this conversation.
And I'm Kamala Thompson, head of marketing at the RevOps Co-op and attribution. Yes. All right. So I think we kind of got into the intro. We're going to jump straight into it. Let's talk about the name of this event. Let's talk about maybe where that's coming from a little bit and where people, because this is a pretty bold statement, and it's difficult to do. So why do we say that asking just isn't enough?
I'm happy to start. I think it is rare these days, especially in B2B marketing, where you don't have a very nuanced multi-channel plan that is driving growth for your organization. And if you don't, it's because your average deal size is small and you're a little bit more like a B2C. And so if you can't understand, if you struggle to understand what the contribution is for each of those channels, and then if you really can't speak to the value they provide, thus the ROI, I would say that we're going to be struggling in future years to remain credible. I'm saying this in terms of you're not going to be a marketer, but I think that breed will die out over time.
Yeah, I would say that there is certainly utility from asking. It is an interesting data point to understand where the user thinks of in terms of where they heard of your organization, but in a more complicated, larger buyer journey, there are several touch points, and there's a lot of bias that gets introduced by focusing too much on the question of how did you hear of us? And so while an interesting touch point, I think that most of us here agree that we want to make data-driven decisions, and those are really enabled by likely a slightly more sophisticated algorithm than simply an input answer to where you heard of us.
I want to step back for just a minute and give a little bit more context. So I think most of us on this panel are used to B2B buyer journeys that are long and require a bunch of touch points before they ever talk to sales. So that's where we're coming from. Single point attribution can be really useful in understanding a certain moment in time, or if you have a tiny sales cycle with a low price point and you don't need a giant buyer committee. I will say the reason I struggle with sound bites that are put out there for going viral is that a lot of times attribution's hard. It is a difficult thing to do, and it's not perfect. So I think when people hear that you really don't need that, you can just focus on this one thing, even if that person has a more complex view overall, people really glom on to the simple advice. And when I was consulting in the attribution space, and I still do sometimes, I heard that and still hear that quoted back to me a lot as a reason not to dig into the more complicated aspects. Drew, do you want to, debate, add on?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, I love that the topic of conversation here isn't that, asking how did you hear about us is bad, because it's not. If you aren't doing that, you should be doing that, period. Like that is unequivocally, you should be doing that. The thing of it is, though, is that human beings are unreliable narrators, right? Like half of us can't remember what we ate for breakfast yesterday. The other half think we can and are probably going to get it wrong. So most of us have just unreliable memories. And so a lot of times self-reported attribution is incorrect. Or even if it is correct, it's still, to Doug and Misha's point, it's still only part of the story. So you are going to get, in some cases, unreliable data. And in some cases, you're going to get reliable data, but it's only a third of the journey or a tenth of the journey or 1/80th of the journey. So it's not a question of, should you or should you not be asking the question of how did you hear about us? Because again, unequivocally, you should, but it's just not enough. You need to do more than that to get the full understanding of what the full story is.
And even with people who are buying attribution, I can't tell you how many times the conversation started in sales with one person, but it was actually the VP of marketing or the CMO that was spearheading, and somebody else held the budget. So the person you're asking the question of, we have buyer committees. It's probably not the only human that's important on the sale. Misha, I think I cut you off.
No, I was just thinking in my mind, how would I define this touch point? And it's something along the lines of, what is the most memorable touch point that you had with this brand, or what is the most recent, right? To Drew's point. So it is very useful, right? You might want to try to create more of these memorable latest touch point before, let's say, a form fill, but something led you there. And that's where attribution can become incredibly powerful.
Yeah, because there's context that how did you hear about us answers, right? Like when somebody comes to your website direct, it didn't just pop into their brain to come to your website direct. Like something triggered that. And when they answer the how did you hear about us, it's probably the thing that triggered them to come to your website direct. So it adds context. They actually complement each other very, very well. Oh, you organically searched us 3 days ago. Cool. What triggered you to do that? Oh, that's what you're going to get from the how did you hear about us? So there's gaps in the attribution data because it doesn't provide the context of what made you decide to search us or what made you decide to come to our website. How did you hear about us fills those gaps, but how did you hear about us has gaps. And attribution fills those gaps. So they work really, really well together.
Well, and any Salesforce admin that's used a multi-select pick list and then tried to report on it understands how difficult it is to do that. But just think about a raw text field, which is usually the recommended approach. It's really hard to analyze unstructured data at scale. And it's something we tried to do 15 years ago when we didn't have a lot of digital data. And there's a reason why we tried to step away from it. No multi-selects. I think I hit a nerve with that one. Should I go to the next slide? All right. I love talking about myth busting in operations, because how many times have we heard someone say Salesforce is broken? And it's not down. They clicked somewhere we didn't expect them to, and they broke the process, which, is on us. just as much as it is like, how did you think to do that? But let's talk about some attribution myths that we hear a lot as people who support attribution.
I mean, I think that the myths that we have here, I think are all great myths. I think that another myth that I would say is that attribution cannot track podcasts. It certainly can. There are methodologies that you can put in place that allows attribution platforms to track podcasts. Will there be a gap here and there in that process? Yes, absolutely. But you can still create like attribution touch points around podcast engagement. So that's a big myth that's out there that I think is widely accepted to just be generally true, when I think most attribution platforms are far more capable of this than they get credit for.
And Misha, I know we've discussed a couple of these points in detail as kind of a source of pain or frustration, not anticipating this hiring the skill and talent needed to read attribution, and just thinking plugging something in will immediately make sense. You kind of need somebody who's savvy enough to tell about the shortcomings and whatnot. Can you build on that?
Sure. I think a proper attribution structure, probably any analytical structure, requires data expertise. It's not a simple data process because there's a lot of, in order for this to become useful, you need a lot of normalization and standardization of data. Otherwise, much like text entry on a field in a form, there are too many variations for this to be useful. But like with any useful model, you really need the business context. And I've found that those two often don't speak to each other in organizations, and that can cause challenges. So ultimately, in order for attribution to be both useful as a strategic tool, so how are we doing as an organization, as a revenue organization, period over period? Are we shifting the right levers to help us move the bar, let's say quarter on quarter? That's one way to use attribution. But I do really believe that there are ways to have attribution be a tactical tool as well, for tuning paid campaigns, for deciding which events we want to double down on. And this requires, to your point, Kamala, it requires creating attribution models, attribution structures, which answer specific questions. So, for example, you might have a model, an out-of-the-box model that will give you all the touch points because we want to measure how we're doing period over period. And so for the strategic question of just measurement as a whole, that might suffice. But if we're answering the question of, I have a budget this quarter and I want to double down on something, I want to move money from something that's less useful to something that's more effective, you might want to create an attribution model that's more limited in its touch points, right? You might want to include only certain ones as opposed to the entire buyer journey. I'm curious what others think about this, about the tuning of models to answer specific questions.
Before we jump there, we have a question that, Drew, I'd love for you to take. What's the benefit of an attribution tool in comparison to native capabilities in the CRM? And they're hoping for specifically HubSpot, but if we could cover a wider swath, I think that would be good.
Yeah, I can talk about both HubSpot and Salesforce. So HubSpot has their native attribution platform that's built into their system. And I think it's good from a starting standpoint. It'll get you started, but it's not the long-term end goal of where you want to be. And there's two main reasons for that. HubSpot's out-of-the-box attribution system and methodology is really good at tracking online activities. Where it falls short specifically is in two critical areas. Number one is offline activities like events, trade shows, attending a webinar, for example. really, really poorly executed in HubSpot's system. Number two is factoring in the touch points that are happening on the sales side of the coin. So phone calls, meetings, things like that. Again, the HubSpot methodology in particular falls short in that area. Now, on the Salesforce side is actually a little bit better at the offline stuff, not as good as the online stuff. So Salesforce falls really short in the online activities, much better than HubSpot at the offline activities because it's all campaign based in Salesforce. The other problem that Salesforce has is Salesforce, again, it relies on campaigns. So things like phone calls and meetings, really hard to get those into the model as well. And then with Salesforce, one of the biggest problems, which is why I call Salesforce Campaign Influence the gateway drug to real attribution, is that it gives 100% of every opportunity that's influenced by a campaign. The campaign gets 100% of the value. So if you have an opportunity that was influenced by 5 different campaigns, and that opportunity is worth $100,000, it's going to look like those 5 campaigns influenced $500,000 when in reality they influenced $100,000. So Salesforce giving that 100% credit to each of the campaigns that influenced an opportunity is not ideal either.
Right.
Both of them are enough to get you started, but they both have enough flaws that your next step is going to be, well, how do I fix these flaws? And that's going to lead you to an attribution tool right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And when marketers quote how much influence they have, and it's different than the sales numbers, they will be judged harshly. Unfortunately, it's just how it is. And it looks like you don't know how much pipeline and bookings were actually generated. And it's a point of, it's not a good look. And it's important to explain how this functionality works to the rest of the business so they know that you're not trying to claim more credit. I think another thing I really want to point out for those of you with either Salesforce or HubSpot, HubSpot, you're limited to how many people you can associate with an opportunity. I think it's something like 3. With Salesforce, you're highly dependent on opportunity contact roles for influence to work. And we all know how much sales loves data entry. So there's a few things I would recommend to get the most out of attribution in your CRM because it is useful. It is limited, but it is useful. Make sure you're gating opportunity creation in Salesforce from a contact or lead conversion. Take it off the opportunity tab, take it off the account, because that way your sales team will have to choose the person they're primarily working with. Hopefully they're in the system and create the opportunity from there. So you do have a primary contact and a primary campaign. The other thing I recommend is if you have Gong or some kind of call automation, there are flows that you can build to automatically append people to the opportunity contact role. It's messy. Your sales team may not agree with that. So make sure you work with your business before putting something like that in place. But did I say HubSpot has a limit of associating 3 contacts to deals? It may be older documentation that I'm referring to, but that's what I've read in the past. It's been a while since I've been the primary CRM admin for HubSpot. I usually work in the marketing side. But regardless, the offline event point is pretty solid. So
Kimla, can I pick a fight with you?
yeah.
Okay. So I think there's a myth missing here. And it's you in particular, I'm going to try not to offend here, but it's this idea that attribution is hard. And I'm going to go back to the great conversation around sort of the ins and outs of HubSpot and Salesforce. I think that the most basic attribution is fairly easy to set up. And frankly, you're probably doing it already. You probably are dumping opportunities and campaigns and running pivots and arrays to understand a basic attribution. If you're not, you're struggling to justify how you're going to get that next quarter or next year's annual budget in place. So you're doing it. And I would say that, if whether it's HubSpot or Salesforce, please deploy one, because not having that ability to understand what's working and what's not is where most marketers are currently. So that's my soapbox. But let me get back to this idea of attribution being hard. I would tell you that as more and more and more of the buyer's journey goes online, and I don't have Gartner's latest number, but I've got to think it's up to 80% of the buyer's journey is now occurring 100% online. Your ability to measure the buyer's journey is getting easier and easier. And so if you're starting from scratch and you can't measure the buyer's journey, you don't have an engagement tool, you don't have a way to measure engagement, yes, attribution is hard. But the reason I sort of bring this back and I have a problem with hearing attribution is hard is because at the end of the day, it, I think, gives people an excuse not to tackle something that is really fundamental to good marketing, which is understanding, one, the buyer's journey, and even with just a super rudimentary model that goes on top of that, right? The whole title of this webinar is asking for where somebody came from is not enough, but you know what? It's a start. I agree with Drew. And I think there's a lot of utility in just understanding that first and last touch point. But the second you have that information and you can sort of backfill the buyer's journey, your ability to make good decisions just gets that much better. So that's my, it's not that it's not difficult. It is, Campbell, I agree. That it's an excuse for others to not pursue having an attribution model, which I think is critical to really effective marketing. And I just would say, please don't say it's hard, folks. Everything we do in marketing is hard.
So agree, and can I counterpoint?
Of course.
Okay. So agree that everybody should be using what you have out of the box, 100%. But Misha and Drew, what percentage of your customers have usable campaign data in the CRM out of the gate?
I would say, just from my experience, I would say that instead of approaching it as what percentage of customers have it, I'm going to approach it slightly different. I'm going to answer it slightly different. I would say about across the clients that we work with, I would say that 80 to 85% of the campaign data that we see is pretty solid. Yeah.
I have not run into this. So what I see too often is a division between marketing operations and either rev ops or sales ops, however their company's structured. And marketing platforms, their data is structured, with the exception of HubSpot, very differently than what you would see in a CRM. So let's talk Marketo and Eloqua. They don't have the concept of an account or opportunity out of the box. You have to build custom objects. It's, if you don't involve sales operations, revenue operations when structuring campaign data and associating it to opportunities, I think there's an opportunity to not be able to leverage your out-of-the-box solutions as much as possible. So what I'm saying is it can be easy and it can be done. It's not a lot of work to put some structure in your campaign data by using campaign types and automations for campaign member statuses. It's all doable, but not everybody knows they have to do it.
But Campbell, I completely agree with you that tends to be a blocker for folks, which is believing that their data is not in a state where they actually can deploy something like an engagement model or an attribution model. And I
would agree with you.
Yeah, it's really rare. Like the number that Drew threw out, I think that's right. But I think Drew ultimately is a pragmatist. I think what I have seen in my career, and just in general, is that it's a really good excuse to do nothing.
Yeah.
But attribution is a forcing factor. It's a forcing function. Or let's say you start with engagement. It's a forcing function. So it sort of forces you to reconcile with the fact that you've got data hierarchy and or data hygiene issues. So I agree that, and the other thing I'm going to point out is that, really, you almost have to be in a state now because there's so much. Let's acknowledge what's going on. It's a bloodbath out there for marketers and for MarTech, right? And so that is also another forcing function where it's like, if you don't have your data clean, you can't make those good decisions. So in some ways, Campbell, I agree, like attribution is hard. And I agree that the underlying data is not always in the state that it's going to be in. But I think this is true for everything we do in marketing. Everything we do in marketing is really tough, right? So yes, is the data in perfect state? No. Get it in place, deploy HubSpot, deploy Salesforce. It's going to force you to really reconcile with those data structures and getting that data clean.
And the funny thing is, I don't disagree with you at all. Like all models are wrong, or some are useful. is what I live by. Like, never wait. Measuring what you have today is so much better than waiting until it's perfect, because it will never be perfect. I 100% agree. I just want to point out that there are nuances I wish more people knew about.
Yeah, I think to my point about the 80 to 85% number there, I think a couple things that I think fit into the conversation we're having here is that most organizations that I work with are far closer to being ready for something like an attribution tool than they are not. They're not as far off as they think they are. Number one. Number two, it's this, and this pairs very well with what Doug is saying. Once they get on the attribution tool, number one, they can see the gaps they have. It's easier to see the gaps. Two, it provides the incentive to fill the gaps. If you can't see the gaps, it's difficult to know where they are and how to fix them. Number two, if you don't have a tool that can actually do great things once you fill those gaps, where's the incentive to fill them, right? So it makes organizations feel like, well, we're probably not ready. We don't really know what our gaps are going to be anyway. Plus, we wouldn't even be able to do anything with it if we filled the gaps. So we're just going to stay the course. It allows organizations to just do what they've always done, whereas this acts as the catalyst to go do better stuff.
I guess my point is perfection shouldn't be the goal, but you absolutely should start now.
And I just shout out to Alan here in the comment. I think, you know, we're speaking to the other part. So it's me sort of agreeing to disagree with Kamala about attribution being hard, but quite often what you're dealing with is a cultural problem, right? And I just would echo what Drew is saying, which is once you have this laid out in front of you, at least you're engaging in that conversation and you're addressing. So like we can't fix cultural problems with attribution, and you're right. Quite often those cultural problems can be as big an impediment as anything else, but it's starting the conversation.
Yeah. Well, in the interest of time. Okay, so we have a comment. I think the single biggest problem with getting sales and marketing aligned on attribution is that it becomes a departmental turf war. It depends on how you position it. And yes, Drew, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Trying to find the mute button. Yeah, I can't stand the turf war thing. It is a problem, and we see it a lot because organization, and it's one of the big criticisms of attribution is that it creates these turf wars. I personally think that that's a misapplication of attribution. If you're using attribution to claim credit for your department or your team, then you're using it wrong. And you're probably going to make decisions that are self-serving as opposed to good for the organization. So don't use the tool wrong. Like it's basically like trying to use a hammer to screw something into a wall. Like you don't use a hammer to drive a screw, you use a screwdriver to drive a screw. Like that's the misapplication of the tool. So yeah, the turf war is a problem and we should always avoid it as much as possible.
So Doug, I would love to hear from you on this one, because as a marketing leader, I've felt the pressure to have some kind of how many dollars in per channel will I get dollars out same quarter. How do you feel about the VP or CMO wanting to use this in the boardroom?
Boy, I'm gonna repeat a little bit of what Drew said, but I think the simplest reporting methods are the best, and I think that I'm going to address the board question, then I'm going to kick us off on attributions direction as a category. But I think you're presenting multiple views to the board when it comes to attribution. And that doesn't mean necessarily you're explaining to the board the difference between a chain-based and a W-shaped and a last touch and a first touch model. But I think what you're doing is you're saying, hey, if this is important, this is how we're looking at the productivity of our pipeline. And here are the channels that were the biggest contributors that we're going to lean into, right? So, in terms of board report, like present the nuance without necessarily presenting the complexity, and let folks know that, and this is my favorite thing to do with board reporting. Like, I know what I'm talking about, and I know where I should be investing and not. Yeah,
I'm glad that opened for everybody.
And then in terms of where I think the category is going, and again, I will say I've been in and around this category now for the better part of 10 years. I think there's two things that will sort of lead changes. The first thing is, I think in a couple of years, we're not going to call it attribution. We'll see what we call it. And the reason I say that is because really we're talking about a collection of different applications that holistically help marketers understand what's happening in their buyer journey and tweak how they're spending money in order to optimize that journey, whatever that's going to be called. We have a position at Caliber Mind on what we think that's going to be called. I'm not going to be a shill for that today, but we think about it in terms of how do we make better and better decisions, right? And I think, look, it's been a pretty awful year for marketers. And that doesn't matter whether you're in RevOps or MOps or SOP, like whatever part of marketing you're in, it's been really rough. And I think from that, I think these are watershed moments. And what I'm seeing is people are beginning to understand that attribution is really critical to their ability to really speak to how well they're doing when it comes to driving that buyer's journey. And to me, that's beginning to form this is why I'm saying go put HubSpot in, put Salesforce in.
Yep.
That gives you an underlying model against which to apply cost data. Even if it's super rudimentary, you're doing it at the end of a quarter, just going peanut butter spreading. These are eye-opening moments. And I'll give you an example. For Caliber Mind, we struggled to get our performance marketing ROI to where it needed to be. And I'm running this stuff on spreadsheets. Well, we implemented our own ROI tool. And now I'm beginning to see that we're like a 5-to-1 ROI in performance marketing. We can be better. But my old model was wrong. It was in a spreadsheet, right? And so once I was able to apply that cost model against sort of the underlying attribution data, I was like, oh my gosh, there are so many areas I just wasn't paying attention to because I couldn't look at what the return on investment was. So the quick way of summarizing how I'm seeing things is that I think it's a collection of tools. I think the category sort of moves as a collection of applications. And I think what's going to really help marketers is we're going to start to demand that we understand what our return on investment is, at least on a channel level.
Misha, I know we've discussed this, that it's hard to take engagement and attribution and pull them apart, and ratios can be extremely, if you could share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, a lot of really interesting comments in the last few minutes. I completely agree with the sentiment that I think marketers as a whole are becoming more data driven and more data literate, and they're asking the right questions. And I'm seeing more and more revenue organizations understanding that attribution is a journey. I think this was mentioned by both Doug and Drew, that start with something, and that will lead you to ask better and better questions of, well, actually, I'm missing this set of touch points. If I'm focusing only on campaign members, then you probably have big buckets that you're missing from sales touches or from perhaps some meaningful web touches. So it seems to be where we're heading in terms of attribution, asking more specific questions. To your question on engagement and attribution, and I would say even funnels, concepts really blurring for me working in this space quite a lot, is that I believe that attribution today is looked at throughout the entire buyer journey. And then we typically have an opportunity creation or an outcome of that sorts against which we measure. And we split up dollars. I believe that in some time, more advanced organizations are going to start looking at attribution or something along the lines of attribution throughout the marketing funnel. So there'll be more outcomes throughout the marketing funnel, more lines drawn in the sand. And we're going to say, can we look at something attribution-like? Are there certain campaigns or activities that seem to be more effective in, say, driving qualified organizations or moving organizations from a status of qualified to subsequently having an opportunity created? And so I believe what you mentioned about ratios is we might not look at attribution anymore with dollar amounts at some point, or we might really lower down in the funnel. But as we're looking at higher in the funnel, it might be something along the lines of well, how can I compare a really high volume of email activity to, let's say, conference attendance? Well, we can do so by saying, well, what share of these that clicked on these emails moved on to some deeper stage in the marketing funnel, right? By looking at ratios, we can normalize the data and get some really interesting insights.
So Janine, I see you. I'm going to have Drew respond directly to you with contact information so you guys can get into it offline. Let's see here. Are there any counter thoughts to what Misha just said before we move on?
I would love to. But I would love to hear, Drew, where you see things going. You are in the guts, as is Misha, frankly. But you're seeing, for good or for bad, Misha and I see what's happening within the context of our product. You're seeing all the different products out there, so you're seeing how each vendor is sort of thinking about the future. I'd be really curious to hear how you're seeing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's where attribution is headed, and I think there's also where attribution needs to be headed. And I think where attribution needs to be headed is increasing accessibility to being able to use the tool. And that is, again, we talk about attribution is hard, and it is, but it's not as hard as I think other people think it is. But there's this challenge that we have. There's a little bit of a skills gap that we have in marketing and operations orgs of people that get this great attribution data and they have no idea what to do with it. Great, I have all this data, now what? And attribution tools need to solve that problem. And I think that we're heading there with things like turning attribution tools into, decision engines, adding AI to help increase, data analysis and get to insights more quickly, and even turning those insights into action directly within the platform by feeding attribution data back into advertising platforms like AdWords and LinkedIn. But I think that if we don't solve that problem, then what's the point of having a tool that creates great data if we don't know what to do with the data?
So we had a question, which attribution tools specifically do you have in mind, B2B or B2C? I think we're mostly approaching this from a B2B angle. I guess people want a list of tools they can look into. Caliber Mind is obviously one of them.
Caliber Mind's one of them, folks, but let's recognize that Caliber Mind is a tool that is very much, or it's a platform rather, sorry, that's very much about servicing complex buyer journeys and larger organizations. We do quite well with mid-sized organizations, to be sure, but Drew really is sort of teasing out one of the core challenges there, and that is that typically the tools themselves are not easily usable. The data is not easily usable.
Yes.
For less sophisticated marketers. And that's one plug I would give for Caliber Mind. It is a much easier tool to use for less sophisticated marketers. But I have to say, folks, go to G2. There's a lot of great tools out there. I'm not going to pump up my competitors, but we'll tell you there's some great tools out there.
But I want to touch on one thing specifically for this audience. I think the biggest gift that revenue operations can give their marketing team are insights around pipeline, average deal size, average time to close, time between stages. I think it's really important for marketers to understand how the sales cycle works and how long it takes, so that the marketers can say, oh, if it's that long, I need to understand what works to drive people in, what works to convert, and what I can do to keep people moving. So really combining that RevOps inherent, it by off the top of your head, with attribution data, that really helps marketers understand in deeper context what works when. So if there's one thing I could ask people to walk away with, it's that.
I want to add on to your point, Kamala. So RevOps folks, you have a unique viewpoint into the sales side of the funnel that most marketing and marketing ops folks, number one, don't even have a view of it, but they don't understand it. Marketing folks, a lot of marketing folks, think about this for a minute. Marketing folks, most of them come from creative disciplines. Not most of them, but a lot of them come from creative disciplines, graphic design, copywriting, etc. Those folks have no idea what happens on the sales side because they've lived their entire lives in marketing, designing things and creating things. And I'm not saying that as Nadia, I'm not saying that as an ouch to anybody. I think it's it's not a knock on anybody to say that. They don't know what they don't know. RevOps folks do know those things. So you have the ability to add context that marketers just don't know. For example, why should we care about win rates? Well, marketers don't understand that, but RevOps people do. How should marketing look at and correlate attribution data to deals that we've lost and the reasons, like the loss reasons for why we lost those deals? Marketers may not think to ask that question. RevOps folks have insights into the fact that that data even exists, that marketers may not even know that data exists. So you have the ability to add additional context to what is a, complex and complicated measurement strategy once you have attribution. So help your marketers find these things that they don't know exist and this context that they just don't have visibility into because they spend their time in their box. And there's nothing wrong with them spending time in their box. That's their box, right?
Yeah. And to double down on that, when I was in sales operations, I was frequently frustrated with marketing operations, not understanding that anything they changed could blow up the CRM. And then I got into marketing operations and I was like, holy crap, this is really hard. You don't know what you don't know. So sharing information is always a great thing. Doug, I think we're going to let you run with this like a toddler with a bag of Skittles. Get it?
There you go. So we've all world-class marketers are using attribution. Drew, do you disagree? Misha, do you disagree?
No disagreement here.
Okay. And a part of the reason they're world-class is they're using attribution. So I'm just going to throw the gauntlet down. Let me tell you how they're using it. Every marketer makes educated guesses. And by the way, I'm going to agree with Drew that a lot of the marketing leadership sort of hails from more of the left brain as opposed to the right brain. I think I have that right. But I have to tell you, like, they're becoming very data conversant very quickly. They have to, right? So those world-class marketers, what they're doing is they're using attribution to unwind bad decisions. And they're doing it faster than you. And they're not telling you about it. We all make good, strong guesses based on what we think will work and what won't. I have to tell you, I've made 2 or 3 bad decisions this last year, right? The things didn't work out, pulled them back right away. I'm not saying a world-class marketer. I'm just saying when you have attribution, you have visibility to when things aren't working. And that to me is so much of the battle. It's killing the stuff that's not working and doing it fast.
It's like bumper lanes at the bowling alley.
I
would
Go ahead,
I
Misha.
would just maybe take a step back from this and say world-class marketers use data at their disposal to make smart decisions about what they should double down on. And attribution is an outcome of that. I mean, it is a way to use a holistic data environment that you critically thought about, that you collaborated on, perhaps with others in your organization outside. So the underlying environment is a curated and well-maintained data environment. And once you have that, then absolutely the goal is to use models like attribution and use them wisely. I don't know if that's I guess what I want to say is that if you get to the point where you use attribution this well, there are many other benefits as well to your organization, to your earlier point, Kamala. Like all of a sudden, measuring which accounts you want to pass on to sales becomes much easier because you have a more trusted, a more normalized and standardized buyer journey.
I've had people ask me, what do I do if my marketing team doesn't want to use data or isn't interested in any of these advanced techniques? Wait 9 months. I'm sorry, but that's not going to work out in the long run.
Well, I mean, whether it's going to work out in the long run or not, I mean, what's the average tenure of a CMO these days? I mean, it's going down and down and down. So, I mean, whether it works out or not, you're probably going to have a new CMO in 9 months anyway. But I want to tell a quick story here, and this is a story I tell about attribution all the time. I'm going to speed run through it. This is something that you can do with attribution that world-class marketers do with it that most orgs can't do, and they can't, or if they can, it's not this quick. So working with an organization years ago, they launched a new paid search campaign, direct response campaign, led straight to a request a demo form campaign that we're all running on a regular basis, right? We did a 30-day check-in after the launch to see how it was performing. Tons of MQLs came through, tons of form fills, high conversion rate, low cost per lead. Everything sounds great. Cool, successful campaign. No, we in 5 minutes were able, because we had really good attribution data and an attribution tool, we were able to spin up a report that said, cool, how many opportunities have come out of all of these people that filled out the form? It's been 30 days. We should start to see opportunities by now. 0, 100% of the records that had been worked by the sales team, that had been passed to the sales team and worked the sales team, didn't even make it to the meeting. They were disqualified by sales because it was completely the wrong audience. We were able to find this out in 5 minutes. We were then able to go look at the ad and realize very quickly why it was. So first off, we had a disqualification reason in Salesforce that told us that they were disqualified because they were too small. They were all mom and pop shops, ice cream shops, nail salons, hair salons, stuff like that. This client didn't sell to that client, that type of organization. So we went back and looked at the ad. Guess what the image on the landing page was?
Oh dear.
It was a mom and pop shop. So everybody that filled out this form thought that this was right for them. So all we had to do was change the image to completely change who filled out the form and who thought that this form was right for them. So we were able to pause the campaign, do that analysis, make the necessary changes, and then relaunch it, do another 30-day check-in and compare the performance. So if you can do that now and do the reporting in 15 minutes, congratulations, you don't need attribution or you already have it. But that's one of the reasons why world-class marketers use attribution. Most organizations just let that thing run and have no clue that all it's doing is leading to junk data.
I love that point so much, because if you're not connecting marketing efforts to opportunities, you run the risk of looking really tone deaf if you're only looking at early indicators. Because if I was just looking at early indicators in Drew's example, that's where I'm spending my money. Duh.
Early indicators, it was the best performing paid search campaign that they'd ever had.
Yep. All right, signs that you need attribution, or maybe you don't. Maybe you don't. I'm going to minimize this a little bit, and I'm going to open the floor to our panelists. I know we're getting at the end of our time, so please ask questions. Let us know where we can help you, and feel free to find us either on LinkedIn or in the community. You may want to define attribution, as we all have different definitions of it. That is so true. To me, attribution is any model that attempts to tie opportunities to marketing efforts. And that could be a first touch. It could be a last touch. It could be multi-touch. Attribution is a pretty broad term, and each of those models answer different questions. So I think it's risky to paint yourself in a corner with a very specific attribution definition. Do other people want to take that?
I think that's really, I really like that definition. I would, the connection of buyer touch points to ultimately the outcome, typically in terms of dollar amounts. So splitting up, an opportunity to the various touches. And yeah, I think a good attribution model as well with that is one that's probably flexible to some of our earlier points to answer very specific questions. But yeah, I really like that definition. I think it aligns well with how at least I view attribution.
Agreed.
Oh my God, I said something we agree with. It's a win. All right, so I think I put these points together. So please let me know if anyone here disagrees with green flags, red flags.
Yeah, I mean,
think
I
there's,
think, oh, go ahead, Doug.
I think they're spot on, and I love the fact that we're emphasizing, it's a red flag if you're using it as a tool to establish credit. It needs to be a tool that's going to help you operate and make better decisions.
Yeah, I think one of the key determining factors for me is how many different ways do you have that you engage with people? I mean, if you only have 3 ways that you go to market, like attribution's too complex for you. You don't need it. How long is your sales cycle? If your sales cycle is 1 month with 1 or 2 buyers, you probably don't need attribution. It's probably, you're probably not at that point yet. But the key thing here is this: whether or not you need attribution is not a static thing. As your organization evolves and matures over time and scales, you go from not needing attribution to needing attribution. So just because you don't need attribution today doesn't mean that 6 months from now, a year and a half from now, you're not going to need attribution. You might have those indicators that mean you need attribution at that point. So it's not a, we don't need it and we'll never need it. It's a, we don't need it right now. We'll reevaluate in 6 months.
And I should
I love that
clarify,
comment.
sorry, that this was written in terms of an attribution solution beyond inherent CRM behavior, because if you have a short sales cycle, of course, it's useful to have first or last touch. Go nuts.
Yeah, I think it's at a point you say, I really want to make. I feel like I'm basing a lot of our decisions of what we should do next on intuition. And you say, I want to pivot away from that. Really, at that point, you should explore some version of it. And it could be in the CRM. But I think at that point, you've started the journey of, okay, what data do I have available? How am I tracking? That's all going to lead you to some perhaps rudimentary but useful attribution solution. And subsequently, we can add more data, campaign members that don't exist in your CRM, to help fill out the buyer journey with more of the touch points that you have. You might just not have them as campaign members in your CRM. So it's going to evolve.
Okay, we have a question. What is your recommendation for tracking attribution for deals that take 18 to 25 months? Any best practices or recommendations?
Patience.
Yeah.
Start with
Flexible
engagement.
attribution models.
Yes,
Right.
a lot of
Yes.
Start with engagement and lots of different attribution models at your disposal. You're going to need them.
Collect those data points. Make sure that you're doing what you can to capture what's digital and what's offline.
I think an important part of this as well is setting proper expectations, because a lot of times we get in this very myopic view of trying to understand, hey, well, we just did this trade show. How much ROI did we get from it? Well, if your sales cycle is 18 to 25 months, you cannot calculate trade show ROI for 18 to 25 months after the trade show took place. And I know that a lot of times leadership doesn't want to be that patient, but I tell leadership all the time, if you want to speed up your sales cycle, because your sales cycle is your sales cycle. And unless you change that, you cannot get to ROI faster than your sales cycle. You don't have a time machine. You don't have the ability to thwart physics and the laws of space-time. So you have to wait that long, period. So setting the proper expectations and then creating a reporting strategy that has leading indicators that build up to that 18 to 25 month window, so that it's not like we're not reporting on anything for 18 to 25 months. We have milestones, and we can do milestone check-ins on that path to the 18 to 25 months.
Okay, we're about at the end of time. We're going to do some hot takes. Mine is, this should be a cross-functional project and RevOps should be leading the way. Drew, do you want to go? Hot take.
Yeah, I mean, my hot take is just that most orgs are a lot more ready than they think they are, period.
Misha.
Yeah, it's a journey. I think if you're committed to the journey, you're going to have some amazing takeaways and useful insights at your disposal.
Doug, bring it home.
If you have HubSpot or Salesforce and you have not implemented an attribution model, theirs are good enough. Get started.
Love it. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. Please do take the survey and let us know how we can improve our future events. And we'll see you next time.